I get it, you're staring at a stack of spec sheets, wondering if you should drop a couple $1,000s on a monitor that promises to be both a cinema-grade recorder and a HDR reference all in one. You've probably seen the Atomos Shogun 7 pop up in a lot of gear roundups, and you're trying to decide if it's the missing link between your camera and the final edit, or just another pricey piece of glass you'll end up tucking away. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The real question is whether the extra brightness, built-in recording, and Dolby Vision support actually solve a problem you have, or just add another layer of complexity you might never use. Let's start with the kind of shoot where the Shogun 7 really shines. Imagine you're out on a rooftop at golden hour, your Sony FX6 feeding you a 4K log image that looks flat on the camera's built-in screen. You flip the external monitor on, and the 7.2-inch panel immediately jumps to 1500 nits, making those deep shadows and bright highlights visible even under direct sunlight. The dynamic Atom HDR 360 zone system spreads that brightness evenly, so you can see detail in both the sky and the street below without constantly toggling exposure settings. If you're the type of filmmaker who likes to lock in exposure on set, that immediate HDR reference can save you from nasty surprise color shifts in post. Now add the recorder into the mix. The Shogun 7 isn't just a display, it can capture the incoming 4K signal in ProRes RAW or Apple ProRes on its internal SSD. That means you can run a clean HDMI or SDI feed to your camera, keep the camera's codec lightweight for longer recording times, and still have a master file that's ready for grading without a separate external recorder. For a solo operator or a small crew that wants to keep the rig light, that dual functionality is a genuine workflow win. Who should consider buying this? If you work primarily in narrative or commercial production where HDR delivery is becoming a client expectation, the real-time Dolby Vision output is a solid reason to look closer. It lets you preview exactly what a Dolby Vision-compatible TV will show, so you can catch clipping or crushed blacks on set rather than discovering them after the fact. It also works well for documentary shooters who need a reliable way to capture high-quality footage in changing light without pulling out a separate recorder. The Shogun 7's 15+ stops of dynamic range give you headroom for those sudden sun flares or deep interior shadows, which is something many smaller monitors simply can't display. On the flip side, if your workflow is already built around a dedicated external recorder, say, you've got an Atomos Ninja V or a Blackmagic Video Assist and you're happy with a separate reference monitor, the Shogun 7 might be overkill. The integrated recorder uses the same SSD slot system as other Atomos units, so you'll need to buy a fast, high-capacity drive if you plan to shoot RAW at 4K 60 frames per second. That's an extra expense that can add up quickly, especially if you're only using the recorder feature sporadically. And for anyone who shoots primarily in SDR or doesn't need Dolby Vision, the real-time HDR output becomes a nice-to-have rather than a must-have. Let's talk about some practical strengths that become obvious once you have the unit in your bag. First, the brightness. On a sunny beach or a high-contrast indoor set, the 1500 nit panel cuts through glare like a flashlight. I've seen other 7-inch monitors wash out under midday sun, but the Shogun 7 holds its own, letting you trust the focus peaking and histogram readings without squinting. Second, the recording flexibility. Because it supports both ProRes RAW and Apple ProRes, you can choose the codec that matches your post pipeline. If you're editing in Final Cut Pro, the ProRes files drop straight into the timeline without transcoding. If you need the raw sensor data for heavy grading, the RAW option preserves that latitude. Third, the user interface is designed for quick toggling. Press a button, and you can switch between the live HDR preview, the standard SDR view, or a false color exposure monitor. That kind of on-the-fly adaptability is a time saver when you're moving from a bright outdoor scene to a dimly lit interior. No product is without its trade-offs, and the Shogun 7 is no exception. The biggest hidden cost is power. To sustain 1500 nits and run the recorder simultaneously, you'll be draining batteries faster than a typical monitor. If you're shooting long days with a single-mount battery, you'll need to budget for an extra pack or a portable power bank. The unit also runs a bit warm when you're recording at high bit rates, so you'll want to keep it out of a sealed camera rig where heat can build up. Another practical consideration is the size of the screen. At 7.2 inches, it's large enough to see detail, but it can feel cramped if you're used to a 10-inch reference monitor, especially when you're trying to judge skin tones in a wide-angle shot. Some users